Hello chess friends and welcome to your Chess channel and welcome back to the World Chess Championship in 2021. So we're following now again the epic battle between the World Chess Champion Magnus Carlsen and the challenger Jan Nepomniachtchi. So far we have seen 3 great games, but unfortunately for real chess lovers the games only ended in a draw. Now we're in the game 4 in which Nepo played with the black pieces, Magnus Carlsen played with the white pieces, and we have seen in the game 2 of this super event that it's not such a huge advantage for Magnus because he played in the round 2 with the white pieces, because in that game actually it was the most brutal of all of games so far. In that game I think Nepo had realistic chances even to win the game. So I think Nepo is well prepared, especially with black pieces, because he found, I think so far, a great repertoire against Magnus Carlsen. So we will see what will now happen. Now again, as I said, Magnus with the white pieces, Nepo with the black pieces, and here you see a Russian game, a Petroff Defense game, in which I think black gains always the symmetry, and the symmetry is a great method in order to create the drawish position. So the draw, I think here in the super event with the black pieces is a huge thing that you can make, and then of course with the white pieces you try maybe to spice up the game again. So let's check out now what happens. So here e4 played by Magnus, we have e5 by Nepo, knight to f3 and knight to f6. We have now the most symmetrical of all openings probably. Here we have the Petroff Defense, the Russian game is on the board. So here after move knight to f6 we have knight takes e5, d6, we have the main line, knight to f3, and here after knight to e4, d4 and d5. And you see now the pawn structure is really symmetrical. We have a 4 versus 4 situation here on the queen side, but also a 3 versus 3 situation here on the king side. And whenever you have a symmetrical position like this, the main issue is that you cannot create real weaknesses. The main weaknesses that you can create in your opponent's position are weak squares or weak pawns. So I'm not seeing good ways always how to create that immediately. So that's why the symmetry in an early stage of the game that black gains here gives, I think, black realistic opportunities to make a draw. And many games are simply ending in a draw in the Petroff Defense. So let's see now what happened. Here in the continuation, Magnus played now the move bishop to d3. This is an important move because we have here already an outpost of blacks. And the problem is that you don't want to tolerate your opponent's pieces on your side of the board. So that's why you have to kick it away. But with bishop to d3, you don't want to take also bishop takes e4. You don't want to give up your light square bishop, your powerful light square bishop against the central knight, because then after d takes e4, the pawn structure gets again asymmetrical. So the pawn structure gets dynamic again. And that's also not something that you want to get. So that's why white plays many times this method, bishop to d3 and then c4, in order to deflect the pawn, the centralized pawn, from the defense of the knight in e4. So this is simple theory of the Petroff Defense. So we have now bishop to d6 here played by Nepo. We have castling and also castling here by Nepo. We have now c4. As I said, simply undermining the pressure here a little bit in the center. We want now this pawn to be deflected and kick away simply the knight from e4. So here in the continuation c6, many times you see also this method. And here after move rook to e1, Magnus Carlsen played now really an interesting choice, because you can also play here the move knight to c3. Then of course the game becomes a little bit more imbalanced, a little bit more complicated. After knight to c3 we have maybe this opportunity, b takes c3, and then after d takes c4, bishop to c4, the main line would be something like bishop to g4. So you have also many games in the database like this. Here after move bishop to g4, I think we can agree that this is now a more dynamic game, but I think with also great opportunities here for black. The pin is very annoying here by black against the knight on f3, so that's why it's not so easy also to play the game from white's perspective. So that would be probably the continuation after potential knight to c3. Here Magnus played a different line. He played now the move rook to e1. In the continuation we have bishop to f5. Here Nepo is cementing simply his position further around the square e4. We have now queen to b3 by Magnus, and now queen to d7. There is also a cool line you can play here, the move knight to a6. Knight to a6 leads now into this lines. After knight to c3 you can witness this position. Knight to c5 would be the main line. This is now really wild position. Then after d takes c5 you get this one, knight to c5, and then you can also take out the bishop on d3. So this is something that you should be also familiar. I think the knight on a6 move here against the queen to b3 is really the most popular line. Here the continuation Nepo Nepo played queen to d7 instead of knight to a6. But actually, I like knight to a6 a little bit more, I have to be honest, because after knight to a6, the problem is you cannot even take out the pawn on b7. You get simply tactic knight to b4, and then the queen will probably get trapped here with some ideas of rook to bx. So it's not so easy, as I said, to play the game here also from white's perspective. So if you want to study the Petrov, you can really analyze many games by Fabiano Caruana. Caruana played many times this knight to a6 ideas, with then afterwards this really cool trick here with the move knight to c5, and then taking out the bishop on d3. So okay, but we'll leave that analysis for another game. In the game after move queen to b3 here, Nepo played the move queen to d7. Here again, Magnus tries to simplify the game by simply attacking for the decentralized knight on e4. We have knight takes c3, we have bishop to f5, of course, very important move, queen to f5, and after b takes c3, and here after move b6. Again, I hope you realize the position gets more and more simplified. Okay, it's not maybe again a symmetrical position, it's a more balanced pawn structure, but without complications, I think here for black, and it's already an equalish game. So I think mission accomplished for Nepo here, because when you play in the game with the black pieces against the world champion Magnus Carlsen, a drawish position is, I think, a perfect position that you can get. So here in the continuation, we have c takes d5, we have c takes d5, queen to b5. Still, this position has been played millions of times, because it's also a very well known and very popular line of the Petroff Defense. After move queen to b5, again a simplification idea by Nepo. I want to simplify the game, I want to get a draw here, and then maybe play a better game with the white pieces. So here after move queen to d7, we have now a4, queen to b5, and after a takes b5, here Nepo plays also a very pragmatic idea. He plays now the move a5, and he's saying like, okay, you can play now several choices here. You can play the move, I don't know, maybe something like knight to h4, but you can also take. I think here Magnus should have probably played bishop b takes a6, but probably he had also something prepared at home, because after b takes a6, here again we can notice after potential knight to a6 move that okay, black is also the weak pawn on b6, but also the weak pawn on d5. So these pawns would be isolated. The isolated pawns are very easy then to attack. But we can also notice that Magnus has a weakness. He has now the weakness on c3, a backward pawn, but also weak square on c4. So I'm not sure how this game would end, but again, I think it would probably end in a draw, because these are top grandmasters and they are probably familiar even with this line. So that's why here after move knight to a6, something like, I don't know, bishop to a3 could happen, bishop takes a3, rook to a3, and then knight to c7, maybe controlling finally this pawn on d5, and then also with b5 we can protect this pawn further. So not so pleasant game. I think as I said, probably this game should end in a draw. So but here after move a5, Magnus Carlsen played a very interesting idea. He played now the move knight to h4, allows his opponent to have this distant pass pawn. And I hope you realize sometimes when you play maybe this knight end games, if you could just imagine maybe the position without these bishops, without maybe these rooks on the board, then this is a winning game for black, because black has here the supported pass pawn. And the problem is now it's a distant pass pawn, and it's a pass pawn on the edge of the board, and knights don't like the pass pawn on the edge of the board, because it's not so easy to attack this pawn with the knight. So that's why here a very interesting idea by Magnus Carlsen, and I'm sure that he has this prepared somewhere at home, because when you play now the move knight to h4 and maybe use a computer analysis at home, this move is here evaluated as an inaccuracy by my chess engine at home. So it was a risky idea by Magnus, but that's the beauty of Magnus Carlsen. He's trying, I think, to spice up the game in this World Chess Championship. We have seen also in the game 2 that he at least tried to spice up the game. Unfortunately, he didn't play maybe the best of openings, but the game became really complicated. In the game 1 also, he spiced up the game by playing this gambit line, sacrificed the pawn in an early stage of the game. So here with the move knight to h4, again Magnus is saying, okay, I'm not going into drawish position, I want to still get maybe somehow win with the white pieces. So here in the continuation we have g6. Here Nepo controls this very important f5 square. If the knight comes on f5, the problem is that the knight comes with the tempo, knight to f5, then you have to move the bishop, and then with knight to e3 we can attack the here the weak square on d5. There is also one cool, maybe after move here, G6. There are many routes for the knight. You have to play still G3, knight to G2, maybe knight to E3. Still you can play this attack on the against the weak square D5, but you can also maybe use some routes. You can play something like, I don't know, knight to E3, knight to D1, knight to B2, and then maybe knight to A4 is also very interesting idea, maybe to stop black's progress here with this distant passpawn, but also to attack then maybe the backward pawn on b6. So this knight is now the most important piece of Magnus Carlsen. Here after move g6 we have now the move g4 by Magnus. You can also play the move g3, but the most important thing is that you liberate the square g2 in order to get your knight to e3, where it attacks of course the d5 pawn. So in the continuation after move g4, here a good move here by Nepo, knight to d7. Here I think Nepo shows really great skills, because many times you want to simply attack your opponent's weakness, but rook to c8 is a suicide. It's not so good. Even if you play something like, I don't know, knight to g2, the problem is now you cannot take. Rook takes c3 is not a possibility. The development is much more important here than just to grab some pawns, because if you don't develop your knight, if you don't develop your rook, you run into really wild tactics. Then of course bishop to f4. The problem is now you have to even sacrifice the knight. The problem is even if you take here bishop to f4, first you get the check, and then after king to g8 finally we can play knight to f4, and you see now your pieces are stuck. You cannot move the knight, so everything is paralyzed here. So that's why development. You will probably have your opportunity and will attack the c3 weakness. That's not the point, but first you have to bring all of your pieces into the game. So here after move g4 we have knight to d7. Good move here by Nepo. Knight to g2. Now we see this path. We want to attack this simple weakness on d5. We have rook from f to c8. Probably again knight to f6. Here for instance also my engine likes more, because here after something like bishop to h6, maybe this time you can play rook to c8, and after something like knight to e3 finally we can take. You can maybe this one, but here after move knight to d7, the most important thing is I think that you control this very important square f6, and you also control here the weak square b6. This is also a line that could have happened in the continuation after move knight to g2. Here Nepo immediately attacks the weak pawn on c3. Magnus Carlsen doesn't react. He plays bishop to f4. We have bishop to f4, knight to f4. Here we have a rook takes c3, and here we have knight to d5. Again a similar position happened, but now with one more big problem, that white will probably get the rook faster on the 7th rank, then black will get some kind of an attack here on the 2nd rank, because when you play rook endgames you want to have your rooks on this rank. So that's the most important thing. But the most important thing to realize is that Magnus Carlsen's potential rook on e7 comes with the tempo against the knight on d7, and I think Magnus has this prepared somewhere at home. He probably knows this outcomes. He played that many times I think in his preparations at home. So although we can notice that Magnus has here weak pawn on d4, has here a weak pawn on b5, we can also say that this b6 pawn is also long-term weakness. So as I said, this is not so easy to play, but the engine shows here that it's a 0.0 evaluation, so it should probably again be a drawish position. So here after move rook to d3, Magnus played now this counter attack, played first again this attack against the knight. We have knight to f8 and now knight to f6. Good move here by Magnus, because after king to g7 we have knight to e8. The king has to retreat, and there are now two choices again for Nepo. You can play king to h8 and you can play king to g8. After king to h8 the game becomes complicated, because first of all Magnus has to protect his knight in order to maybe grab the pawn on f7. Here then you have to play rook to e1 because the knight has to be protected. Here in the continuation maybe rook to d4 could happen, and then after rook to f7 maybe something like rook to g4, king to f1, and now after king to g8 here rook to g7 can happen, and maybe Magnus would try some perpetuals after king to h8, and then something like rook to f7, and again the main threat would be something like, I don't know, here knight to f6, and then try maybe here creating this battery on the 7th rank, and try even to deliver checkmate. So it's not so easy. So probably again king to g8 would happen, and the game should lead probably into some perpetual moves and probably into draw. But here Nepo shows, okay, I'm not going to do perpetuals. I still want maybe to even win the game. I'm trying to spice up the game because I'm the one that has a distant pass pawn in a potential fully end game. I should be better here, so that's why I liked also Nepo's choice. He tried still to play the game, tried to still complicate things with the move king to g8. Here Magnus plays now the move d5. Brilliant move, because you cannot take, you get the fork. That was the most important thing that Magnus Carlsen has prepared here. So now after move d5, we have here a4. Nepo is showing I have a pass pawn too. It's even better than your centralized pass pawn. Here the continuation we have now knight to f6, and after king to g7, now Magnus played the move g5, supporting this knight. You see the knight is protecting the pawn on d5. So far Magnus Carlsen's accomplishment was that he has now a fixed and glued together position, which is also good to have, especially when the pieces are not connected, so you want to connect them further. Now in the long terms we can expect maybe some rook batteries, but we have to know this pass pawn of Nepo's is also one tough pawn to handle. So in the continuation again Nepo shows I'm not scared, I'll just push the pawn with move a3. So really complicated game for both sides to play, but as I said again, the engine shows here probably a drawish position. So after a3 you have several choices. You can play maybe something like h4, but the problem is you're getting, of course, your g5 pawn fixed. The problem I think is when you expose yourself a little bit too much with your pawns, these pawns can be attacked. There are really many lines that you can play. Also what black is probably barred off, because you can risk always if you leave the protection of the 8th rank, and if you maybe leave with the knight, you always risk maybe some rook to e8, then rook to g8 checkmate threat. So here in this particular position Magnus tried simply after move a3, he tried knight to e8, king to g8, knight to f6, king to g7. So both players after 3 times perpetual agreed to a draw. So I'm not sure. The engine also shows that it should be probably a draw. Magnus Carlsen didn't want to risk anything. I think it was a good choice, because especially of this distant pass pawn, many sidelines you can play really. Here Magnus had around 20 minutes on the clock. As I said, he didn't want to risk anything, and as I said, it was now our 4th draw of this super event. So I think it's a fair draw. Great choice again, play by Nepo here. I think in any moment I don't think that Nepo got challenged here by Magnus. Nepo played a really decent opening again with the black pieces. 2 times now in a row Nepo gets out of the opening with the black pieces very easily. We'll see now what will happen in the game 5. So far the result is, I think, realistic to the games that they have played so far. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Maybe this was slightly too drawish game for my taste, but still this is, as I said, a World Chess Championship. If you want to see some other games from the super event, check out my coverage so far with some other games that we have analyzed before. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.